going to go live. It says we're live. Now I have to go to my Twitter profile, and we did it. We're live. This is very exciting. We did it. Let me include you on the screen. Okay, Mark, we are here. We are live.
Yes, it's exciting.
Okay. It is, and it's so exciting. One of my lights just burned out this second. So I see Party Through USA is here, so thank you very much for being here. And Mark, hopefully you've had a chance to find that tweet so you can also share it.
I did just share it. I'm going to send it to a couple of people.
Cool. So
this is this is awesome, man. I'm so excited for this.
Okay, well, we're live now. So
all right, okay.
Yeah, right? Okay,
one more.
Okay.
All right, perfect. All right, we're ready.
Okay, great. So I want to thank everybody for being here, and I see Guy has joined the room. So thank you very much for being here, Guy Mish, and as well, my Matilda. Thank you so much for joining us, and Ron, thank you so much, Ron. Yesterday was so much fun, and I'm glad we had such a positive reception to it. It's always very interesting discussing social media. And thank you. You were so informative and giving us some legal framework for it. So again, thank you so much, Mark. We've been planning this for, I think, actually a few months, haven't we?
I think so, yeah. I think we have been.
Yeah, we have been. And so this is going to be part 3 of our investor series. So thank you very much for joining. And in part 1, we discussed kind of the geopolitics, what's going on all around us. Because we're going to be seeing a lot of sector rotations. We've seen a lot of concentration into what's called the FANG stocks, into FANG. We've seen a lot into technology, right? And we've seen what I call the defragmentation of the world. So we've grown up in a world where everything was kind of being split apart, and a lot of companies were making acquisitions and then divesting themselves of them and spinning them off as IPOs and other ways for, as dividends. And we're seeing that change now. So that also gives us an opportunity for what we in finance call sector rotation, which is where is money going next? And I think that requires kind of a much broader view. So we looked at in the first investor series that we did, we looked at how the world was being bifurcated, right? So now we're seeing countries choosing their allies. Is it going to be the United States? Is it going to be China? And then what's in their own best interest? Because, these things are kind of iterative and they're a little bit on this side, a little bit on that side, but it affects so many different industries. And it gives us the opportunity to, what I say is to skate to where the puck is going. And that's also what we're looking to accomplish here. So in the second segment, we looked at fossil fuels and natural energy and kind of this worldwide crunch that's occurring, and how much will a Green New Deal affect that? How much will solar energy affect that? And now in this one, Mark, we're looking at nuclear energy, which is a conversation you and I had, I guess, maybe 5 months ago. Is that right? About 5 months ago, when the world was still
It was in January.
Oh, wow. The world has changed so much. So now we're looking at nuclear energy, and we're looking at how that affects the geopolitical scene, how that affects certain countries, how it's going to affect their markets, and how it's going to affect us as investors. Does this give us an opportunity to find new segments that we can get kind of outsized returns from the market from them? What happens if things start shifting away from Facebook? Where is that money? That money is not going to disappear. It's going to be reallocated. We're trying to anticipate where it's going to be reallocated to and why it's going to be reallocated to. So with that being said, Mark, thank you for being here. And if you would be kind enough to introduce yourself, would that be all right?
Well, thanks for having me, Adam. This is super exciting. So I am a lifelong or a career nuclear operator. That's the term I've always used. But I'm a guy who has very few hobbies. My wife is a nuclear engineer. In fact, she's actually remotely working upstairs right now. Wow. And I've been in the industry since I was 18 years old. So I literally was raised by the nuclear industry. And then in my spare time, I advocate for nuclear energy. And, so that's just who I am. I'm a guy, I've served in the Navy for 20 years. I did, served on aircraft carriers and submarines. There's not a lot of people that can say that. And then I worked in the commercial industry as well. So I've seen all different aspects of it. And then through my wife and her experience, she deals with the government side of nuclear in a lot of manner as well. So, my offline conversation with her also educates me So I'm just constantly learning about nuclear. I probably learn something new about nuclear every day, which is, I think, one of the coolest things about the industry.
Yeah, it is. And so that's very interesting. I didn't know your wife worked in nuclear and that she was working on something nuclear upstairs. I guess that's a good thing. Right? Yeah.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So what we were discussing last week with Tracy Chigurh is how much is nuclear energy and how much are the fossil fuels going to be displaced by what we call the Green New Deal. Whatever that actually becomes is still unknown. It's a bit ambiguous. And then we were looking at it as a casebook, as a textbook example, I guess, California and kind of their own infrastructure flaws and distortions in that market. So would it be all right if we just have kind of first a broad conversation about what you see? Can the Green New Deal displace nuclear, and how much are they going to have to coexist, and how much capacity still has to be serviced by nuclear?
Well, I mean, so U.S. 20% of our energy infrastructure is nuclear power, and we've seen, and using California as an example, they were at 20% back in 2013 when they had the San Onofre was online, and 10% of their power is still nuclear because of the Diablo Canyon nuclear power station. And if you actually look, the rolling blackouts really started to begin in California with the shutdown of San Onofre. So California, by going away from nuclear, is actually destabilizing their electrical grid. So that's one of the big things is because nuclear is a reliable energy, we turn it on and off as we need. And with renewables, you're dependent on the weather to make that happen. And so that's the big thing is you're not going to get rid of nuclear. It's going to be around for, as long as humanity is.
So does that mean that California is actually going to have to build more nuclear capacity and infrastructure?
So I think what California is going to do is they're going to go the route that they are doing now, which is they're going to rely on other states to bring in their power. So the largest power generating station in the U.S. is Palo Verde out in Arizona, and it's really close to where a lot of the power is just basically purchased across state lines.
Okay, so now she was also saying that the electrical grid there is so antiquated that it really couldn't deliver reliably the solar and some of the kind of the Green New Deal. And you're the nuclear person, so please, if you could give me the better words.
Yeah, so that is one of the things is that with your wind and your solar is you're setting your infrastructure in areas that are ideal for those conditions, which means you have to have long transmission lines, and that is a big problem. And they were shutting off power last year in California because the high voltage lines were getting caught by the wind and they were igniting fires. That was the concern. So they have rolling blackouts because they have insufficient energy during peak temperature times when the temperature's hot, and they have because of their renewable energy requirements. Because of that, the long transmission, when you have high winds, you actually have to shut off your power lines so that you can not cause the fires that they experience every year. Try to minimize that.
So do you see the states around California then building up nuclear? I mean, how do they correct for this?
You are going to see the states around California start building nuclear because you can now Nevada doesn't have any nuclear, but we have a large government lab out there that actually that's doing major testing for nuclear. They actually tested in 2018. They brought online a reactor for space deployment. So,
really? Yeah.
Yeah. So they proved a concept out there. And then Arizona, when they actually built the Palo Verde generating station, it was designed to have 8 reactors, and they only built 3. So they have the infrastructure locations there, and California actually has the ability to build new nuclear. If you go through and you look at there was I think 4 or 5 plants that were licensed to build, and they even started construction, and in some cases, and they never built them or they didn't finish them.
So what are the states that and I see sometimes on Twitter you're sharing announcements of various states and municipalities kind developing their nuclear? What are the states that you're looking at that are kind of more innovative or more rational in bringing on nuclear?
So the number one state that when it comes to nuclear, that's going to be the really exciting state is actually Idaho. So they're going to be building the NuScale power module, 12 of them. So it was just licensed last week. So brand new design. It's a complete revolutionary change from the current nuclear in the U.S., which are all large scale, nearly 1 gigawatt or 1,000 megawatts of power. And then with these NuScale modules, they're each are 60 megawatts. And so you're going to get about 720 when you have 12 of them running. And then another state to watch is Georgia, because they're getting ready next year to bring online the first new nuclear construction since the 1970s with the Vogtle units 3 and 4. And so those are really the two big states in the U.S. to watch, in my opinion.
And so when you're watching these things, are you also watching particular companies? Are you looking for the announcements, or are you looking for the announcements from particular companies? And what are those companies?
So I look for just general announcements, but the companies I'm looking at are Southern Energy, which they own the Vogtle, and they are also partnered with TerraPower, Bill Gates's company. And TerraPower just partnered with GE Hitachi for it's a 300 I think it's about 350 megawatt liquid sodium reactor with solar salt or molten salt storage to kind of allow for the peak periods, energy storage. So that's an interesting thing that I'm seeing with TerraPower and GE Hitachi. GE Hitachi also has a partnership with Dominion Energy for their called the BWRX 300, which is a 300 megawatt boiling water reactor. So those are the big U.S. companies. When you get to the international stage, there's one company that is just dominating the nuclear industry, and that's Rosatom. That's the Russian state nuclear corporation, and they are building all over the planet. So it's fascinating. So what Rosatom is amazing when I see the stuff that they're doing. I mean, they're in Hungary. They're getting ready to build in Egypt. Egypt, literally the day that they agreed with, talk nuclear and Middle East peace, which is a weird thing to think about. But UAE puts their first reactor on the grid and starts powering their country with nuclear energy, the first peaceful use in that region. And then the next week, they announced that peace deal with Israel. And then the following week, Egypt says, we're all for this. Oh, and by the way, we start construction on 4 Russian-designed VVER 1,200 reactors in 2021. Like, that all happened in a week. So it's this weird dovetailing of Middle East peace and nuclear energy.
And Rosatom is actually an adversary of ours, aren't they? I mean, this doesn't sound like something I should be kind of celebrating. I know it's remarkable for you to observe these things because you're so into the science of it. But that does make us that does improve their hand as an adversary, doesn't it?
Well, it does improve Russia's hand as far as geopolitically, and it'd be nice if the U.S. would catch up. And we are seeing some of that. I think that the U.S. and India recently signed an agreement to build, I can't remember, 6 or 8 AP1000 reactors. The U.S. has built the AP1000. Another company is Westinghouse. It's Westinghouse design, and they built 4 in China, and then they built that's the design that's being built in Vogtle down in Georgia, and so we could see more of them build. They're the only nuclear company in the U.S. that really has construction experience in building new nuclear. And now, unfortunately, the Chinese being the Chinese, Westinghouse builds 4 of them, and then the Chinese basically hit Control C and then Control V on the plans for the AP1000. Then they have what they call the CAP1000, which is the Chinese version, and they're building a few of those in China right now without U.S. help. So basically, they just, like China does, they steal all our proprietary information and then built it themselves.
Yeah, so that really strengthens. I have a little bit of a list sometimes. So that really improves their position in Africa, as Africa is more countries are going to have to rely on Africa for their extraction, for their mining, and for their rare earth metals, and that also improves their position within India. Or has India been able to kind of repel that? Yeah.
India is an amazing place when it comes to nuclear energy. There's three forces at play in India with nuclear that are all building nuclear. You have the Russian, Rosatom is building several reactors in India. You have the US getting ready to build several reactors. And then the other thing, just last month, India put online a reactor that they designed and built themselves. So India is doing it themselves, and they're getting outside help. So, they're kind of taking, a systems approach of, I know I need energy. I've got, a billion people to provide energy to, and we're just going to get it done. And so they're using multiple methods to make it work, which is absolutely amazing when it comes to what they are doing.
So how much of their energy now will be displaced? Currently, they're on coal. How much of that energy will be displaced by nuclear? Do you project forward at all?
So I would say with India, they're probably not going to be displacing coal for a while, much like China's not really shutting down its coal operations, because they still have to power their people. So they have basically a huge potential energy demand that isn't being met. And so as they put units online, they're going to just basically consume all that energy, and they'll just keep adding units for a while. And then maybe 20 to 40 years down the line, you could see them start coming off of coal, much like China's doing as well. And one of the things that China is working on is they have an advanced reactor design that is actually based around their standard coal plants, to where you could rip out the coal boilers and put in a nuclear reactor. So you have your turbine and most of your infrastructure is already in place.
I see so many good questions that people are asking, and so I'm going to switch around a little bit because some of their questions are just so much better than my own questions. So I'm going to ask. You should be able to see this on your screen. Hopefully, everyone can as well. Gary asked, "Hi, Adam. Please ask about the cost of transmission of electricity from out of state." So now we're traveling back into the United States.
Yeah, so that I'm not a transmission expert, so I don't necessarily know how that cost is, but it's we have multiple grids in the U.S. Because there's a northeastern grid, there's a midwestern grid. Texas is on its own grid, the western U.S. is its own, and then the southeast. And typically, what happens, and you got some states are regulated, some states are unregulated, meaning that the utilities can charge X amount of money for their electricity versus the market determines the amount for their electricity. So it's this there's a lot of factors that go into this, and a lot of it's between the utilities. So let's say PG&E, Palo Verde is actually its own company, separate from a utility. So PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, or San Diego Gas and Electric, they may need power, and so they'll say, hey, they'll set up a contract with Palo Verde to put this amount of electricity onto the grid for them. So it's so convoluted with all that. And I mean, my background in electricity, because that's when I was in the Navy, I was an electronics technician. My background with this in the Navy is when you put if you plug electricity out, it goes everywhere. It's not like you can, there's no lanes of traffic for it outside of the wires. Once it's on the grid, it's on the grid, and you're just, it's almost arbitrary how they figure out, who's getting charged what.
Okay, cool. And then Gary asked another question, and I'm not sure if this is in your expertise or out of your expertise. I guess we're about to find out. They asked also, green energy requires storage, and they inquired about the battery cost of that.
So this is an interesting topic, because a lot of people, they use the levelized cost of electricity construction, or levelized construction of energy cost, LCOE. And when you look at it, it's usually priced in cents per kilowatt. kilowatt hour or cents per kilowatt generation. And like nuclear is like 16 cents per kilowatt hour or per kilowatt of generation in construction. Natural gas, I think, is like down at 7. And your renewables are somewhere between 14 to 20, depending on what it is. And when you get to talk about battery cost, it's $3. So as much as the Greens want to talk about, or the renewable energies want to talk about, well, we'll just get battery costs, and that $3 is a projection into the perfect cost, like 20 to 30 years in the future. Right now, it's somewhere between $7 and $8, and that's in addition to, right? So you have to build. So let's say you're building a wind or a solar farm, you have to pay that 14 to 20 cents per kilowatt of generation, plus your storage capacity is an additional $4. So it's just not really a cost-effective, method.
So how much do you see? And I hate calling it Green New Deal, but that's the only words we've been given yet to describe whatever that phenomenon is. So how much do you see it disrupting, bringing on new nuclear online?
It's actually doing a lot of that, and a lot of it comes to the subsidies. So wind or renewable energies get $7 billion in subsidies a year. And nuclear, this is from the federal government, nuclear gets nothing. There's no subsidies for nuclear from the federal government. There's the Planet Vogel has a government-backed loan that's on a subsidy, right? They're going to pay that back with interest. But renewables are getting $7 billion a year, and it basically is driving these utilities to build wind and solar, which is, you look at California, which, by the way, California has spent $100 billion on renewable energy. For cost, they could have replaced their entire grid with nuclear to include their existing nuclear and have reliable energy for $100 billion.
So do you see these things coexisting? Because
yes.
Somewhere we have to look for where does money go next, right? And fossil fuels, the share prices of some of these companies were really not interrupted even during Obama's administration. So now that we're trying to kind of speculate as to what happens next within those companies, within those industries, and how much, and we're trying to discern between what is kind of the rhetoric, which is, it makes sense. Rhetoric is always a part of kind of delivering on a message, presenting and delivering on a message, and the reality of it. So when you look at these things, how much do you see kind of the competition between the two? Or do you really see them kind of coexisting?
Well, and you could see both at the same time, right? So there is some competition. And then when you look at companies, I'll shout out to Terrestrial Energy. So they've actually designed their reactor, which I believe they're trying to license in Canada. They're a Canadian-based company. And their design is actually, it does what's called load following, meaning that if you put it in conjunction with, say, wind and solar, as wind and solar are going offline, this reactor can respond rapidly to that change. That's something that large-scale nuclear power plants that operate now struggle with. They can't ramp those units rapidly. There's just the physics behind these large-scale pressurized and boiling water reactors. When you change out to different coolant types, it allows for a different geometry in your reactor that allows it to operate and adjust rapidly. And we know we can build pressurized water reactors. You can do this, and then go back to the NuScale. Their design actually has great load following characteristics as well, because their 17th employee is actually a friend of mine. He and I served on a submarine together. And U.S. military reactors are actually designed for rapid ramping. They ramp up and down because you sometimes you want to go fast, sometimes you don't, and so they ramp those units all the time in a rapid manner. And so one of the things NuScale did was they brought in a lot of these engineers with that military nuclear background, so that their reactors are designed for rapid ramping.
Okay, I'm going to continue to skip around because I have my own list of questions, but I see that everybody else's questions are actually a little bit better than mine. They really are very interesting. And thank you so much for being here. Hold on, let me just, so you can see this question. Thank you so much for being here, Vijay Kumar. So they ask, generation 4 reactors safely, I have a little bit of difficulty seeing it from this angle. Generation 4 reactor safety could reduce liability cost, encouraging investment, or are they too optimistic?
No, actually, you're not too optimistic. I think that's a one of the great selling points about Generation 4 reactors is their safety feature, right? When the international community came together to define Generation 4, which is a really complex definition, one thing that was key to that definition was that they had to have what's known as unlimited passive safety, or you would a layman's term, they're safe from meltdown. So when you remove that, and the NRC is licensing a Generation 4 reactor, it's the Aurora, designed by a company called Oklo, and with their design, the NRC is trying to figure out, well, what type of footprint? Because right now, if you go into a nuclear power plant, they have emergency communicators. They call the state and local. They have an NRC communicator. So if there's an accident, they're jumping on the phone, and so that they can evacuate people. Right? We saw this in Fukushima. You see it in Chernobyl. Even 3 Mile Island, they were preparing for evacuation. But these new reactor designs are so safe that the NRC is like, well, the accident footprint is the plant. I don't have to worry about it spreading outside of that. So I don't need to have someone to be there on the phone to go tell the city that you had an accident. We need to move on. There's no risk of that, so you don't have to even be concerned about that.
And I'm going to skip around it again. And I see such an interesting question here, so I want to be responsive to that and make sure you have a chance to see it. But when you see new reactors coming online or being built, or even being kind of theorized to get built, as these things have to get kind of legislated in, do you, for example, in Idaho, does that then bring whole new industries to Idaho? Or have you ever kind of examined the relationship between a plant coming online and the new energy and also kind of a migration into those areas?
Well, and that we've actually seen that there's a history of that. Whenever you build a reactor, you bring high quality jobs to any location. Idaho, actually, where they're building it, is one of the nuclear centers in the U.S. It's where all the very first Navy reactors were built. The design of their prototypes were built. There was an Army reactor that was built out there back in the 1950s. They've actually had a couple of accidents out there. The very first reactor that generated electricity was in Idaho.
But so do you see a lot of new businesses there that will be coming on, not just to support the infrastructure there, not just to support kind of the local economy and the restaurants, but does that also bring within a new startup ecosystem? And what kind of a company is it?
Well, when you have a large scale plant, you do have a centralization. Like down in southeastern Virginia, you have a couple of nuclear plants. In North Carolina, you have nuclear plants as well. And so you see companies like Nucor, big steel company, that they'll build within the vicinity where they can get electricity, relatively cheap, going to that transmission cost. And they have deals with the utilities where they have to help minimize that levelized cost. With these new reactor designs, specifically the small modular ones like the NuScale design, like the Oklo design, is that you're going to modularize your construction. So you may build things in different factories at different locations, and then you could ship them in. So you may actually have it, one of the things that may be fascinating is you might have a city that is, experienced in, say, turbine generation, building a turbine skid, a turbine module, and then a completely different city in a different state that is an expert in, say, building your condenser package, and then they could ship them in together, and then you'll have the temporary jobs of the actual infrastructure build on site. But ultimately, I think we'll see, because of the modular nature, a disconnected, but still producing, in our larger production. And we in the U.S. actually have experience doing this. If you look, you can see the picture of the USS Washington. That submarine was built in modules just like I described, between two shipyards.
Yeah, gotcha. So is there also a startup community, or are there startup companies or young companies, or do the Rosatoms and the Nucorp and the rest of them, do they do everything in-house, or do they also rely on an ecosystem of smaller companies, particularly startups, where they're looking for innovations. So where do you see the innovations happening? And are these public companies, or are they private companies? Or essentially what I would say within my own kind of investment world is, what are the smart kids they're doing?
So you have a mix. So you have some public companies. GE Hitachi, and they're an international company, right? They built the first generation 3 reactor in Japan, right?
Yeah.
Which is the very first one. And they're using their existing capabilities. They have, multiple generation 3 designs, they have multiple generation 4 designs that they're working on, and they're partnering with startups like TerraPower, right? So you have that. Or you take a company like Oklo, which is a pure startup, 16 people, right? 16 people in the first generation 4 design to be submitted to.
What's the name of that company?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Oklo. It's named after a natural nuclear reactor that existed 2 billion years ago.
Okay.
And so their design, it's 16 people. They took that. Remember I told you about that space reactor out in Nevada? They took that design and said, I can make it bigger, right? So you basically take you can take micro reactors like a space reactor and make it bigger, or you take large scale reactors and make it smaller. That's what NuScale has done, is they've taken a large scale and made it smaller. But what Oklo is doing is they're using a lot of, how can I build a reactor? I have our portion that we design and build. What can I use that exists in the the economy already? So they've designed their unit around a 1.5 megawatt supercritical carbon dioxide turbine. So they already have, when you go to build the reactor, they have to figure out the manufacturing and who they're going to have to, to build the reactor itself. But once you get the heat generation portion, well, now I just slap in, this other, this existing piece of equipment, and I make it work.
So what are the other companies? You mentioned Oklo. Who are the other companies that you kind of are impressed by? Forgetting for just a moment about the larger companies, because I do want to continue traveling around the world to India and see who are doing the big deployments and see who's building up kind of the infrastructure to support the nuclear within India. I'm very interested in that. And within certain countries within Africa, I'm particularly interested in that as well, because I'm looking how much they capacity. So one of my thesis is that, American innovation is so expensive and our energy costs are so expensive that we need to start going downstream, right? That trend is just going to continue. And as innovation and becomes so complex and so expensive, and, so many high hanging fruit problems have to be solved internally within the US, right? To create new jobs and new industries, that a lot of what's not very high yield is then going to get moved downstream. And if it's going to get moved downstream to India, then certainly they need to have energy, right? And particularly Nigeria as well, and some other countries that are competing for lead developing country status.
Yeah. So specific corporations that I think are super exciting. One that's very fascinating to me is Thorcon. They're a Seattle-based company, and they've actually developed a partnership with the nation of Indonesia. And so they're going to design the reactor and they're going to build them in Indonesia, but it's a floating reactor, much like Rose Adams' academic Monoso, which was basically it's a barge that has nuclear reactors in it. You basically float it into position, connect it to the grid, and turn it on, right? So that's their design, is that they want to, Thor kind of said, hey, it's nuclear in the US is very difficult to do because of our regulations. And it's really over-regulation is the problem. It's not that Indonesia lacks regulation. Indonesia actually has nuclear. They have a test reactor there. So they understand nuclear to some degree, maybe not large scale power production like the US, but they don't have the same kind of restrictions that we've put on ourselves for,
Yeah.
But so they're going to build it. But then the great thing about that is by being a barge, their idea is actually Africa focused. So build them in Indonesia, and then because it's a barge, I can just go ship it into Africa. And most of Africa, almost the vast majority of the people in Africa live close enough to a water source to where their unit will work properly. Other exciting companies, Terrestrial Energy, like I mentioned before, great startup. They're based out of Vancouver, British Columbia. You got the Ultra Safe Nuclear Corporation. They got a really cool design. I can't figure it out on top of my head because there's so many of them.
how much of the innovation is happening internally within those companies, and how much of the innovation are they kind of acquiring from an ecosystem of small startups or spin-outs? I mean, what are you seeing?
So it's interesting because a lot of this is intrinsic to themselves, and then really the education system in the U.S. for nuclear energy is actually focused on, nuclear design in a lot of ways. It's actually not designed around nuclear operations. So in the U.S., right, we have universities that are set aside for, things like, I use Embry-Riddle as a prime example. They basically have a degree that's based on operating aircraft. We don't have anything like that for nuclear in the U.S., but all of our nuclear stuff is based on designing reactors, not operating them. So it'd be like going to Embry-Riddle to get if you want to fly a plane, you go to Embry-Riddle to get a degree in how to design a plane. You don't really need that type of thing, but that's how. So we actually see innovation from the universities as well, and a lot of universities have test reactors that they operate. And if you see, there's great videos of showing reactor pulses, this really cool blue glow that occurs. Those are all university reactors.
Do you see a lot of scarcity right now for those jobs that you were describing? I mean, when you say we're not producing we're producing plenty of one skill set, but we're not producing enough of the other. Is that the way I understood it?
Well, yes. And now there is one organization that does produce what the commercial power industry needs, and that's the United States Navy. They have a school designed around operations of nuclear reactors down in South Carolina that they send all their operators through. And they are basically, if you want to get a job in nuclear in the U.S., that's your best way to do it, is to go into the Navy. Right now, because there is a shrinking number of large-scale commercial reactors in the U.S., it's getting smaller, not larger. So they get to be more selective in their people. So if you don't have operational experience, the utilities aren't going to hire you right now. That's the unfortunate way it's done. And back in the past, they used to, and this is something that's somewhat frustrating, is that we don't have any kind of outside the Navy training program for nuclear operators. So each plant actually trains its own people. And they would literally go to high schools and say, hey, we're going to hire 18-year-old kids off the street. This is, 20, 30 years ago. And so they would basically, come work for us. They're going to sit you in a classroom, teach you how a nuclear power plant works. So I think in a lot of ways, we have, the industry has failed itself in a lot of ways.
So do you look for mergers and acquisitions? Is that something you're anticipating as you kind of examine the topography of the industry right now? Are you anticipating, for example, Nucorp or whoever else, or Rosanna, making strategic mergers and acquisitions?
I think we are seeing that. We're seeing some partnerships, and as companies, their designs get built, they're going to be acquired or merged with other companies. I think that's going to happen. The GE Hitachi and TerraPower partnership is relatively new, and so that's something that's fascinating. So you have GE Hitachi, an existing company with that has nuclear experience and nuclear construction experience, partnering with TerraPower that has a Generation 4 design with some great offsets to it. So I could see a merger there, so that you could take a complete focus and have a complete package to go build.
So does a company like Thorcon stay independent as its own company, or at some point does it need to be acquired?
I'll be honest. I'm not super smart on that aspect. I think Thorcon's model, they could probably stay independent, just because they're looking, they're thinking way outside the box compared to most nuclear companies.
But don't they still need a lot of money just to kind of build out these things and to operate these things?
They do. And one of the things that's fascinating with nuclear is you see a lot of the partnerships between companies and nations. Right, that's where the capital comes from. So Rosatom is going to be building a reactor in Kenya. So Kenya is going to front $5 billion to build a reactor. Right, so there's a partnership between a company. little different because Rosatom is the state nuclear corporation, so it is basically Russia. But the fact that you can, Indonesia is partnering with Thorcon to do this, you can do that, or even UAE. UAE partnered with KEPCO, which is the Korean electric power company, and the reactors built in UAE are a South Korean design, and they partnered with a South Korean utility to build theirs. And going back to that discussion about universities, the Russians have a nuclear power university where they teach people, because I think it's Turkey that they had their first class of people for a new reactor. It's a Russian design that just graduated so they can go operate it.
So did we lose a step then with Westinghouse? Did the Westinghouse collapse permit kind of the growth of Rosatom and some of these other companies? Because I think my friends in India and my own analysts had really expressed a lot of disappointment that the new Westinghouse reactors, and I know you want to discuss them, but the new thorium or whatever it is, and I'd like you to elaborate on it, but they couldn't get built.
Yeah, I think at Westinghouse, they kind of bit off more than they could chew in the U.S., and that helped with their bankruptcy. So we were building 4 AP1000s in the U.S., 2 in South Carolina at the site of VC Summer, and then the 2 in Vogtle. And part of the problem, and this is a U.S. problem, and I learned a lot about this from Tim Eccles, who knows Georgia really well, because he's the energy commissioner for Georgia, and he was telling me that basically the unions really strong-armed Westinghouse into forcing this. And you look at the cost overruns that are associated with both the Vogtle project and the VC Summer project. I mean, Vogtle Unit 3 is actually going to cost double the expected cost, which is not necessarily unexpected in large-scale nuclear construction. But a lot of it comes down to when you go to build a reactor, because of these large-scale projects, it's a partnership with the state government. This is something the U.S. also we have a struggle with. Partnership with the state government, and the state government says, well, you have to have this union, these benefits associated with it, and it really drives up the cost of nuclear.
And I know we had discussed on and offline India, and when Trump was visiting India, part of that, what was anticipated, and I think it happened a few days later, was an announcement of some type of a nuclear deal with India. So could you again kind of go backwards a little bit and explain how that would be implemented and what kind of the net that would be?
Yeah, so that's a partnership with Westinghouse, because they're going to build the AP1000 reactors. And so now with that, Westinghouse, when they do an international build, and I'm sure one of them will correct me if I say something wrong, but you have basically 2 portions of a nuclear reactor that are built, or a power plant, nuclear power plant. You have the nuclear steam supply system, and then you have the generation system, right? Those are your 2 big ones. And Westinghouse would basically be responsible to design, build, and provide most of the equipment associated with the nuclear steam cycle. The turbine and all the associated, they're the non-nuclear systems, if you will. It's all nuclear, but it's not the nuclear critical infrastructure. You could build locally. And so there's some that you would do locally, or you could do it from another international project. A turbine's a turbine is a turbine, right? I can, build those pretty much anywhere. If you have, main steam reheaters, well, that's just a piece of equipment that we can, mass produce in, different areas. I say mass produce, these things are like, 100 feet long. But so it will be a collaboration. I think it will be interesting. And I believe that's how that worked in China. So Westinghouse will basically take the experience they developed for doing this internationally with China to doing this in India. Yeah. So, but it will employ a lot of Indians, for work, as far as the construction, and it will provide, a source of revenue and jobs in the U.S. as well.
And I'm going to skip around a little bit because I see somebody makes an observation that I want to share, and I'm just going to add to it a little bit. So LLL eggs. So thank you so much for being here. observed that they lived through 3 Mile Island as a child, and now they live in Nevada by Yucca. Huge nuclear power advocate. And I want to add to that. So I'm interested in what you have to say about that. But in India and in these other countries, for example, Indonesia, which you were discussing with about Thorcon, do they have that same mythology anti-nuclear? Are you seeing that there? Or are they much more active and yeah?
No, they don't have that mythology. And in fact, the 3 Mile Island accident it unfortunately happened 12 days after the release of the China Syndrome. So we had, this is the power of media, right? So we have this big blockbuster movie starring Jane Fonda, and that comes out basically talking about a nuclear meltdown, and then 12 days later we had the exact same thing happen, right? Based in a movie, right? So we created a mythology, and then circumstances caused that to happen. Japan just blew up 3 reactors, and they have an exclusion zone around those reactors, and they're talking about building new nuclear still, right? So we have a mythology, like you said, and if you look at those accidents are completely different, right? We destroyed a reactor in the U.S. at 3 Mile Island that we probably could have salvaged. We probably could have taken, we took all the melted fuel out. If we needed to, we probably could have taken the reactor vessel and replaced it. Like we can do that. We have the capabilities of it. And so they probably could have, brought 3 Mile and Unit 2 back online and could have run it for 40 years, right? We could have done that, but we allowed that mythology to get in the way. But then you look at Fukushima, right? They blew up 3 reactors and they killed 1,200 people because of evacuations, and they're still willing to assess and build nuclear. And, you look at 3 Mile Island, the worst thing that happened at 3 Mile Island is the citizens around there got about a dental x-rays worth of radiation exposure.
So crazy. And because I want to be so respectful of everyone's time, and again, thank you everybody so much for being here. And I'd like to commit us to about an hour. So that gives us about another 13 minutes. I'm going to give you like those fast rounds, whatever you call those things where I say something and you fire back. Okay.
Yeah.
So crazy news cycle. And thank you so much for being here. Ask, what about thorium?
All right, so thorium is a nuclear fuel, right? It's no different than uranium-235, which is the primary fuel used in light water reactors, or plutonium, which is bred from uranium-238. So it's just a fuel. It's a great fuel. It's very abundant, 3 to 4 times more abundant than uranium. And now that's of uranium total. Uranium-235 is only 0.7% of all uranium. So, hundreds to thousands of years of uranium-235. We got 250,000 years worth of uranium-238, and we've got about 750,000 years worth of thorium available. It's a great fuel. I like thorium.
Oh, that's awesome. That was good. Okay, so M. Fox Hunter, and thank you so much for being here. And we've spoken offline as well. How far can nuclear energy be used efficiently? And then they add distance-wise.
We're talking like a large scale and then transmission. I mean, right now, if you look at the way nuclear is done, they've got transmission lines that stretch for hundreds of miles. So you can do that. You just have to amp up your voltage rollout to reduce your losses due to heat. So you can do that. But when you're talking about these small reactors, some of them are getting to being air cooled. So you need a water source so that you could put these in the middle of the Sahara Desert and operate a reactor that doesn't need any water.
Okay, and then Kumar, who is data rate, so thank you so much for being here, Kumar, has observed for 50 plus minus 50 years, India was blocked from nuclear power.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating because of the association between nuclear weapons and nuclear power. You had reactors designed to build the material, to generate the material for nuclear weapons. So you say nuclear, and there's this crazy association. And so the international community really has blocked a lot of nuclear construction. So it's frustrating from that. And I mean, I love that we can get nations into nuclear now. UAE, brand new nuclear nation. And there's I think 5 European nations. We're seeing Egypt's going to go nuclear. Kenya's going to go into nuclear. And there's 12 other African nations that have partnerships signed with or in negotiations for partnerships with Rosatom to build in Africa.
Okay, and then Kevin, and before I show this, I do want to say it's been my experience with Kevin, and thank you so much for being here, that he does sometimes embellish his language a little bit. So I'm going to soften it up. Kevin asked, why aren't we building Generation 4 in Africa to bring them out of poverty and then to improve their mining and farming there? Is that fair, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, Kevin, that's a great point, and I think that's where you see Thorcon, a Generation 4 design. That's exactly what they want to do. Because think about it, think about what you could do if you built a reactor you could then ship in place, right? I don't require a large scale African, infrastructure to build this stuff. That's part of the problem. That's why India is successful. That's why China is successful. They have experience in nuclear construction now, but Africa has none, right? Except South Africa, which is ancient experience now. And so if I could build it somewhere else, bring it in there, and then, yeah, you could put up a data mining facility right next to it. And now you've got good high quality jobs for, the local Africans, for the local nations, bringing money and resources in, which, electricity, I don't know if you've seen Juice the movie, they talk a lot about Africa and how to get Africa, electrified.
Okay, and thank you. And Vijay Kumar, again, thank you so much for being here. And they say info, India medium-term NEP plan to increase nuclear by tenfold to 630 gigawatts by 2030.
Yeah, 63 gigawatts. By the way, that's about 2/3 of the amount of nuclear energy the U.S. produces. So that's a large amount of power, and yeah, that's awesome.
And I'm just going to flash this from Kumar again. India is a bull. Yes, one of my interests, and again, it goes into kind of what I call the investor series, is we all as investors have to kind of figure out what's going next. I mean, we know Tesla, and everybody knows I've been extremely bullish on Tesla. We know Facebook, and everyone knows my thoughts there, and Boeing and Space Force. And the world is being cartelized, right? We realize that the world is being defragmented. Everything is kind of coming back together like an oscillating universe. We're watching the whole universe start collapsing in, which is really interesting to watch, and we're going to have some really big winners. And now we're looking for where those cartels are going to, both the United States cartels, where are they going to extend themselves overseas, what gets acquired, what doesn't get acquired, and where are the cartels, the Indian cartels, going to be in the defense industry, because they'll, every country will be kind of indigenously also producing its own cartels. So we're also trying to kind of identify what those are. So I'm very bullish on India as a substitute in many ways for our relationship with China, and one that certainly won't have the antagonism, and it'll be one sovereign democracy to another sovereign democracy. So I'm actually very excited about that. And then David, and thank you so much again for being here. And I'm having difficulty with my camera, so I'm going to move it back and forth because one of my lights burned out. So you'll see a little bit of that. Okay. So then David, and thank you so much for being here, David, asked any key enabling technologies to watch for. And they give as an example what the semiconductor industry was for the IT sector.
So here's one that actually is exciting for existing nuclear. There's a company called Lightbridge that has a whole new fuel design that would basically extend existing nuclear plants. They could upgrade all the reactors by about 30%. So you got a 1 gigawatt reactor, and now with just changing fuel, which they do every 18 months anyways, I can now make it a 1.3 gigawatt reactor, right? So that's pretty cool as far as the existing nuclear. I think that I'll go back to the company Oklo. That is probably the semiconductor for nuclear, because they're a completely different out of the box design, thinking, and it's micro. Their reactor's only 1.5 megawatts. So, we're talking, that's, a large scale nuclear reactor is usually about 200,000 homes worth of energy. They're down in the 1,000 home range. So, and they're only about the size of, they're about a 1/4 acre footprint. So you could put these in a university, you could put them in the basement of a skyscraper, you could put them, powering a small town. And so I think that, going with the IT, the semiconductors just kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller, right? Like the first transistors would fit in your hand, and now you have a chip that has, like several million on them. So.
Okay, and then thank you so much for being here, Meredith. So she asked, New Jersey proposing wind farms. What are the chances for United States nuclear?
Well, and that goes back to that previous conversation that we had about the subsidies, right? $7 billion in subsidies. The utilities are going to build the wind farms because they're guaranteed to make money, right? We have to remember that utilities are companies and they have stockholders and they're supposed to make sure their stockholders are happy and their shareholders and all that. And unfortunately, without if we don't subsidize nuclear the way that we're subsidizing wind and solar, then we have those same problems.
Okay, and interesting question again from Kumar. So thank you for asking everybody for thank you for asking so many questions that are just so much better than I was going to ask. So Kumar asked, how does the data rate asks, how does the presidential administration influence long-term U.S. nuclear plant proliferation?
Well, a lot of it is the regulations they put in place or remove, right? So we just recently saw that the regulation for the U.S. to internationally fund nuclear power construction projects was repealed. So we now have the ability to do something we couldn't before. So we as the U.S. and our investors can now fund a nuclear reactor being built in India, whereas before we couldn't. When you look at, in the U.S., we put in regulations in place that basically don't allow us to reprocess our fuel, which France does all the time. So we don't have a lot of experience in that. And then the other thing is that we use a specific type of reactor. It has to be these one type. And so we don't have the experience to build. And that's one of the big hurdles for these Generation 4 designs, is that they're using such a radical change that we don't have any experience with that outside of the 1960s.
Okay, and because we're getting kind of short on time, and I just want to be respectful to everybody, it's been 56 minutes, and I guess we're going to go for about another 10 minutes, which is going to give you an opportunity to answer 50 if you can do it really quick. Okay, so Guy Mishmish, and again, thank you for being here, asked, how can a retail investor capture the upside in nuclear in USA and worldwide? And before you can answer that, let me just say that I'm in no way trying to encourage any investments in anything. We're looking at a scheme, and then we're, again, trying to skate to where the puck is going. And I've tried to emphasize that point that, we all have to be futurist. One of the objectives of being an investor is not just to be able to reliably forecast what comes next, but is also to reliably forecast what the future will be, but also to make sure that you don't suffer it. So we're all looking for how we can get outsized returns. And there's going to be a lot of shifts. I mean, we are seeing a lot of geopolitical volatility, and already you can see kind of the consequences of that, and investments are clearly about to shift, regardless of who becomes the next president. And that was very helpful what you had just said, Mark, that once the regulations are in there, the methods of extracting them and kind of the consequences of them are. So just in a broad schema, Mark, could you respond to that without giving any brokerage or analytical advice there?
Well, I mean, if you want specifically to invest in nuclear, I would go to utilities that have existing nuclear power generation. And then the other thing that you can do is go to other companies that do things like a nuclear construction. So you have the two private nuclear shipyards in the U.S. That do the construction. You can promote that because they actually work with these other companies. And a lot of them have subsidiaries that are publicly traded, or they have partnerships that are publicly traded companies. So a lot of it is, we could rattle off, 1,000 companies on here. But if you want to, you got to find a focal point. If you want to go look at,
what are the companies that you look at? Just that you have on your Quotron, what I call a Quotron, we just, I still kind of archaically call it a Quotron. What are the companies that you kind of regularly look at?
I look at Southern Energy or Southern Nuclear. I look at Dominion Energy. I look at Huntington Ingalls Industries. They build our aircraft carriers and half our submarines. I look at General Dynamics, which builds the other half of the submarines.
What are the smaller companies that you typically look at, and why are you looking at them?
The smaller companies I'm looking at are Oklo, are Terrestrial Energy, or TerraPower, are UNSC, the Ultra Safe Nuclear Corporation, X Energy.
Gotcha. So Tesla Trey, thank you so much for being here. And what a wonderful picture of someone golfing there. So that sounds good. Do you know, and they asked, do you know if any of those nuclear companies are buying batteries from Tesla?
I don't, but once they get into build, they probably will need some kind of Tesla batteries for emergency systems.
Yeah. And Vijay Kumar asked, nuclear cost currently includes liability costs, which will replace with next generation reactors.
I think it's going back to the previous comment about the liability costs are going to go down if you have a safer reactor design, which is a true statement. I'm
going to answer this one from Orange Mie. And thank you so much for being here. If you could teleport back to back to being a 22-year-old, I suppose, which specific, or teleport back 22 years, whichever, it's almost the same. If you could teleport back 22 years, which specific energy investments would you make? And let me be responsive to that. I'm happy with every investment kind of that I made, and even those that I haven't made, I'm perfectly satisfied with those as well. I try not to look backwards at all, and for those, I try not to calculate those spectacular wins that I didn't make. I'm much more interested in what happens next. So this is a very helpful conversation because we can see the world is changing, and I don't ever like to assess whether it's getting better or getting worse or the way it was then. I just looked at, we are seeing a transformation, and some part of that is, and part of my investment thesis that I communicate with everybody very late in 2019 was that 2020 and now into 2021 is when Americans are going to have to start becoming much more familiar with geopolitics, not just because of wars that I expect, but they're real physical confrontations as though we're now seeing scaled within India and their and what's occurring with China. But wars express themselves in many different ways. So the bifurcation of the U.S., the bifurcation of the world that we were discussing in the Investor Series Part 1 is a real ripple, and you are going to start seeing that, and that does change our thesis for what the rotations are going to be into. So that's what we're looking for. So I'm perfectly happy with the last, with what happened previously. I'm much more interested in what happens next, and I am interested in which companies are going to benefit from having greater nuclear capacity, which is clearly one of them is going to be India. Somebody asked about Africa, and I think you were very helpful with explaining that. So hopefully that was responsive a bit to that. And then here, this was a question I asked you during lunch, actually, when we met. Are localized micro or smaller nuclear reactors being near being realistically plugins? Actually, if you could ask that, because I can't really see it too well from my screen.
Yeah. Well, so the question is, are localized micro or smaller reactors near being realistic plugins for smaller communities? And that's actually the Oklo design that's in licensing right now. So that is their basis behind it, is that small micro 1.5 megawatt reactor. And then the new scale design being a 60 megawatt, and you don't have to buy them in a 12 unit facility. I think they offer them in 3 and 6. So, you can scale nuclear when you use smaller reactors to what your community needs.
I'm going to actually skip by this just because we have so many different questions, and I just want to make sure. Jimmy Sidecar asked, nuclear is technically renewable, is it not?
It doesn't meet the technical definition of renewable, which is basically it doesn't consume something, for its energy generation. But I mean, it's effectively it's as long lasting as renewable.
Yeah, and then Draft Hobbyist asks, some politicians say we don't have time to build nuclear. Is that true?
So that is the argument that the Green New Deals are using, is they're saying that we can't build nuclear fast enough, so let's build the unreliable power instead. That's a child's play, in my opinion.
And then here, Ricardo, if it would be helpful if you could actually read that question loud, because the angle, okay, and now with my light burned out, it's a little bit difficult.
Okay. Excessive regulation or lack of funding for research and development been the main drivers of high costs for nuclear. That is absolutely true in the U.S. Our regulation costs have just driven the cost of nuclear up. What the Russians can do with $5 billion that the U.S. needs $15 or $20 billion for is just ridiculous. And a lot of it does come down to the regulations. I'll go back to the Vogtle project. Vogtle Unit 3, they had to rip up the entire containment foundation because I believe they had a slight problem with the concrete that was poured.
Okay, and then Jimmy Sidecar asked another question, and if you'd be kind enough to read that also, because again, my angles here are brain.
Yeah, so several metals industries are highly dependent on cheap abundant electricity, aluminum, et cetera. And yeah, so typically, when you look steel, you look at aluminum, all those. Yeah, they do require a large amount of electricity, and that's one of the things that would be amazing about these small reactors is that, let's say you've got a plant like Nucor, and they need power. Well, right now they're dependent on the electrical grid. Well, if they had their own reactor that they could have on site, they could basically run steel 24/7, 365, except when they need to do an outage. Well, they do outages anyways to do maintenance upgrades and things like that. Well, you just shut your unit offline and then go onto the grid for your, a short-term electricity just for, maintaining your equipment.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for asking that question. And then again, if you could read this.
Are there any?
I see the question on one side of my screen, but when I put it here, I can't see it anymore. If you could just say it slowly so that everyone has a chance to hear it.
Are there any particularly hostile laws that prevent investment into U.S. nuclear industry? I am unaware of anything specifically with that, so I don't know anything in regards to that. So.
Okay, and then on a conceptual framework, I suppose, Jake, and thank you so much for being here, Jake. And I'm going to have to read it from here. It says, who has the best method to overcome the American public's enduring but irrational fear of nuclear? So let me rephrase that a little bit to soften it up around the edges. Just from what you've seen, what is the best way to kind of overcome, maybe we could call it a hurdle of people's mythologizing former catastrophes and then projecting them out forward as to catastrophes to come if more nuclear is implemented?
Well, that's basically what I'm doing. Is trying to do the nuclear reframe, and a lot of it. And I work in an industry that for some reason doesn't believe communication is as important as it is, and we choose the worst words. And so I'm trying to slowly drive at that. Let's be smart about how we're doing this, and it's tough.
Okay, and then Jake, and thank you so much for being here, Jake. It's very thoughtful of you. Why does it take so long to build reactors historically? Is it regulatory burdens, and is that something that is changing?
So it is regulatory burdens, and then specifically in the U.S., it's because we don't have experience anymore, right? So these are large scale projects, right? These are not, it's not a small thing. It's not like building a house, right? You can build a house in 6 months if you have the right, everything's set up and you have, a large number of vendors and you have a large, product stream, right? Or a large, support network. But we don't have that nuclear. So, I need a reactor vessel to this specification. Well, I have to get my licensing approved, and then I have to go to the company to build, to design it, build it. And everything gets cascaded.
And then Vijay Kumar, if you could again read that, because the light is just
really 3D metal deposition nuclear components manufacture is going to accelerate safe nuclear builds. So 3D printing, or again, my industry uses the worst word. They call it additive manufacturing, but basically printing a reactor. And they're actually, I think they are doing this in the Oak Ridge National Laboratory now. So they're designing and 3D printing them.
And then, hi, Patricia, thank you so much for being here. They comment, hi from Berlin, the country that's shutting all its nuclear reactors.
Yep, and their electricity price is going up like sixfold because of it too. So I feel your pain.
I know. And then this is a really wonderful question, because I'm such a bull on Space Force and how many jobs it's going to create downstream and how much innovation is required. And I just see it in so many different places. And every time I speak with my friends from the Air Force or from different parts of what's now kind of becoming Space Force, nuclear is actually such a very big part of the conversation. So I'm sure you're already familiar with the relationship between the two better than I am. But so Elon Musk said with rockets, the production line is the real path to success. And can we get nuclear to the same path?
I think we are seeing that. I think that's with these new, and it's kind of weird because you got to have separate the two. So you got, the space reactor production program, which will help drive others, which is kind of fascinating. So I think it's pretty awesome.
Okay, so MLS Fix Dave said they are an ERAU grad here. So I guess that's some type of
Embry-Riddle
doing.
Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University.
And I have to skip around. I want to be so respectful of everyone's time, so there's only so much I can see. Lightning round. I think the lightning round I have to be respectful for because I'm trying to scroll through everything and I'm not sure if I can make it. And this might be our last question. So Ricardo asked, what's the shortage of qualified labor to scale nuclear to plus minus 50% of the U.S. electricity?
Oh, what's the shortage? That's a big question. Wow. I've never been asked that kind of question before. The shortage of qualified labor to scale nuclear to 50% of its electricity. So that would be an over doubling of nuclear. So you're probably looking at, you short about 100,000 qualified laborers and technicians and engineers. You probably need about 100,000 people. That's a quick guess.
And I see Shailesh is here, and I'm so happy that we're going to be doing something. He's a venture capitalist and very involved in both the ecology and agriculture within India as well, and the preservation of such. So I'm very excited that we'll be doing something, an investor series, very soon that includes him. And I'm excited because we'll have a chance to talk about the venture capital startup ecosystem within India, and he's very much a part of that. And Shailesh asked, what will be the best way to build a startup ecosystem in nuclear?
That's I'm not super smart on startups, and I think that as an industry, there is a startup group that's building, and that's something that's almost new in nuclear.
Okay, and then Kip, and thank you so much, Kip, for being here. And Kip, he and I speak occasionally offline, and both he and I have been sustained and enduring bulls on the stock market. So hopefully everyone's had a chance to profit from the resilience of the market. And then Kip asked top public companies to profit from with a greater move to nuclear. And this is not brokerage advice, so I just do need to emphasize that. Yeah.
So the companies I'm seeing that are going to profit the most from this is the cannabis industry, for one, because they need large amounts of energy for their grow beds.
Wow.
The other is any company that requires some kind of data center, right? So you're looking at Microsoft, Amazon, because they want reliable power because your internet needs to work 24/7, 365. So eventually that's where I think that the true point, the belly button to push, if you will, to get it would be to take these companies that need large amounts of power in a reliable nature. And if you could drive them into it, it would do very well. And by the way, these data companies are specifically seeking out people that have been through the Navy's nuclear power program.
And then Cynthia asked, and Cynthia has asked a few questions, and I'll try and go through several of them really quickly. Cynthia asked, please comment of the nuclear, if you could actually read that, it appears to me to be comment of the nuclear radiation being installed into buildings.
So please comment on the radiation being installed into buildings. So radiation exists, it's around us. If you ate a banana this morning, you ate radioactive material, it just exists naturally. You drank a glass of water, you consumed tritium, the ever so dangerous tritium that everyone talks about, because it's some radioactive material is generated in nuclear reactors, but most of it is generated through natural processes, particularly the sun.
And then she continues, and it looked like a 3-part question, so we can respond to, I suppose, 2 parts of it.
So nuclear has dangers to health, and cyberspace has caused weather changes. I'm not sure what the concerns as far as the health are. The amount of radiation exposure that the public has received from radiation is extremely low. I've received doses that are much larger than the public receive in a single day, and actually an hour at operating a nuclear power plant. And I'm a pretty healthy guy, and I know thousands of people that have received radiation intentionally for work, and they're all healthy.
And I see Alan is here, and thank you so much, Alan, for being here. We spoke yesterday offline, and he was generous enough with his time to indulge me in looking at a few minutes of the COVID fastest roll-up of power in history log that I've created. So thank you for permitting me that opportunity to show my enthusiasm for that. And I'm very excited about your book upcoming. So that's really remarkable, very exciting. So Alan asked, with the incessant power cuts, could a pro-nuclear movement get off the ground in California?
It can, and I like going back and name dropping these companies are doing great. Oklo is actually a San Francisco-based company, so we are seeing companies in California that are slowly changing, the way people view nuclear energy.
And then, and I'll try and make it just one or two more questions. So I'm really looking here quickly. KAG 319, and thank you so much for being here. As an average citizen in the U.S., which we all are, what books can I read about the new nuclear?
It's fascinating because I've actually never read a book on new nuclear. It's all been through, just discussions with engineers, and that's a problem. So I get asked this question a lot, and I feel like I fail this question every time I get asked it.
Okay, and this is going to be our last question, and we've run an hour and 16 minutes. So thank you, everybody, for spending this time with us. So GA1 John and GA1T John, and I certainly recognize the symbol and the name from Twitter. So thank you so much for being here. Ask, which rare materials resources are most required for the ramp up of the nuclear industry?
Ooh, that's a good question, and I can't think of anything that's necessarily rare. I don't know, because I know like in a and each design uses different things. So I'm thinking about like the control rods in a traditional reactor, typically made out of silver. It's silver. It's indium and. So there are some, but yeah, that's an interesting thing. I do know that uranium is somewhat of a limiting factor as well. So I would say finding uranium resources, that's probably the biggest one.
So this has been fantastic. I want to thank you so much, Mark. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. It was amazing.
Yeah, and I hope everybody enjoyed this, and I hope everybody found it very informative, and it's going to improve and enhance everyone's kind of view of the world and what happens, both not only what happens next within this future where we're walking ourselves into, but how we can be on the profitable side of it. And so I want to once again thank everybody for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye-bye. Now, bye.